His 93-year-old mother passed away after a nurse abused and brutally beat her. The son was heartbroken, and justice seemed impossible, until a biker stepped forward. He did what everyone thought was impossible, and gave that elderly woman the justice she deserved. This story proves that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Thomas Mitchell received the call at 3 in the morning. His mother was dead. The nursing home staff said it was natural causes, just old age. But when Thomas arrived at Meadowbrook Care Facility, something felt wrong. His mother's face was bruised. Her arms showed marks that looked like fingerprints. The staff had cleaned her up, but they couldn't hide everything. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Ride for Justice. Thomas demanded answers. The night supervisor, a thin woman with tired eyes, kept repeating the same words. She fell. Old people fall. It happens all the time, but Thomas knew his mother. She was frail, yes, but she hadn't walked unassisted in 2 years. She couldn't fall. Someone had hurt her. He called the police. 2 officers showed up, took some notes, and left within 20 minutes. They said they'd look into it. Days passed, nothing happened. Thomas called again. The detective assigned to the case told him there wasn't enough evidence. The nursing home had records showing his mother had dementia, that she was combative, that she often hurt herself. All lies, but documented lies. Thomas hired a lawyer, 3 lawyers, actually. Each one took his money, made promises, and eventually told him the same thing. Going after a nursing home was complicated. The facility had insurance, teams of attorneys, and a spotless reputation in the community. They'd tied up every loose end. Without witnesses or video evidence, there was nothing to do. The case would cost hundreds of thousands, and probably go nowhere. The funeral was small. Thomas sat alone in the front row, staring at his mother's casket. She deserved better than this. She'd raised him alone after his father died, worked 2 jobs to put him through school, never complained. Now, she was gone, and the person who killed her would never answer for it. After the service, Thomas stood in the parking lot. That's when he saw the motorcycles. 6 of them pulled up near the chapel. The riders wore leather vests with patches. One man, bigger than the others, walked toward him. The big man's name was Derek Paulson. He had a grey beard down to his chest and eyes that had seen too much. He walked right up to Thomas and said, "I heard about your mother." Thomas didn't know what to say. He'd never seen these men before. Derek explained that his group, the Iron Riders, attended funerals for people who died without justice. They'd been doing it for years. Someone in town had told them about Thomas's mother, about what happened at the nursing home. "We'd like to help," Derek said. "If you'll let us." Thomas was suspicious. "Help how?" Derek didn't answer directly. He said, "Sometimes the law doesn't work. Sometimes you need people who know how to dig deeper, ask the right questions, apply the right pressure." Thomas knew what he was implying. These weren't lawyers. They weren't investigators. They were bikers who probably operated outside the law. But the law had already failed him. What did he have to lose? He gave Derek his number. That night, Derek called. "Tell me everything," he said. Thomas spent 2 hours on the phone, going through every detail. The bruises. The lies from the staff. The police doing nothing. Derek listened without interrupting. When Thomas finished, Derek said, "Give us a week. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone at the nursing home. Let us work." Thomas agreed. He didn't know what these men could possibly do that trained investigators couldn't, but something in Derek's voice made him believe. The Iron Riders started that same night. 3 of them went to a bar near the nursing home, the kind of place where staff members drank after their shifts. They didn't ask questions directly, they just listened. People talk when they drink, especially if they think nobody's paying attention. On the 3rd night, they heard something useful. A young nurse named Sarah was talking to her friend. She was upset, crying into her beer. "I can't keep covering for him," she said. "That old woman didn't deserve what happened." Her friend tried to calm her down, told her to stay quiet, that speaking up would only cost her job. Sarah nodded, but kept crying. One of the bikers, a man named Colt, followed Sarah, and she left. Not threateningly, just keeping distance. He watched where she lived, what car she drove. The next morning, Derek showed up at Sarah's apartment. He knocked politely. When she opened the door, he introduced himself. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. "I'm here because you know what happened to Margaret Mitchell. And I think you want to do the right thing." Sarah's face went pale. She tried to close the door, but Derek put his hand on it gently. "I heard you at the bar. You said she didn't deserve it. You were right. She didn't. And her son deserves to know the truth. Sarah started crying again. Derek waited. Finally, she let him inside. What Sarah told Derek changed everything. There was a nurse at Meadowbrook named Craig Hendricks. He'd been there for 6 years. Most of the staff hated him, but management protected him because he was willing to work the worst shifts. Craig had a temper. When patients didn't cooperate, he got rough. Everyone knew it, but nobody reported it because he threatened them. He had connections with the nursing home administrator, some kind of personal relationship that kept him untouchable. The night Margaret died, Sarah had been working down the hall. She heard shouting. When she got to Margaret's room, Craig was standing over her, his fists clenched. Margaret was on the floor, bleeding from her mouth. Craig saw Sarah and said, "She attacked me. I defended myself. You saw it, right?" Sarah was terrified. She nodded. Craig made her help him put Margaret back in bed. They cleaned up the blood. Craig wrote in the chart that Margaret had fallen. He made Sarah sign it too. Margaret died 4 hours later. Derek recorded everything, Sarah said. She gave him Craig's full name, his schedule, even his address. When Derek asked why she hadn't gone to the police, Sarah said, "Because Craig told me he'd make sure I never worked as a nurse again. He said he'd tell everyone I was the one who hurt patients, and I believed him." Derek thanked Sarah and left. He called Thomas immediately. "We found who killed your mother. His name is Craig Hendricks, and we're going to make sure he pays." Derek knew they needed more than one testimony. Sarah was credible, but a good defense lawyer would tear her apart. They needed proof that Craig Hendricks had a history, that this wasn't a one-time incident. The Iron Riders split up. Some went back to the bar, cultivating relationships with other nursing home staff. Others started visiting families who'd recently had loved ones die at Meadowbrook. They didn't mention Craig's name at first. They just asked questions. Did anything seem wrong? Were there unexplained injuries? Did the family have suspicions? Within a week, they found 3 other families with similar stories. An 81-year-old man with broken ribs that the nursing home said came from a fall. An 89-year-old woman with bruises on her neck who died suddenly from respiratory failure. A 76-year-old man with a fractured skull that staff claimed happened when he hit his head on a bathroom sink. All 3 deaths had occurred on Craig Hendricks' shifts. All 3 had been ruled accidents or natural causes. All 3 families had tried to push for investigations and been stonewalled. Derek brought these families together. They met at a church basement, away from prying eyes. Thomas was there too. When these families heard each other's stories, the pattern became obvious. This wasn't bad luck or unfortunate accidents. This was a predator who'd been operating freely for years. But they still had a problem. The nursing home had covered everything up. Medical records had been altered. Staff members were too scared to talk. The police had closed all the cases. Even with multiple families coming forward, they needed hard evidence that Craig had been violent. That's when Derek had an idea. He called a friend who worked in tech, a former Iron Rider, who'd gone straight but still helped the club when needed. Derek explained what they needed. His friend said they could do it, but it wouldn't be legal. Derek didn't care about legal anymore. The tech expert hacked into Meadowbrook's security system. Most of the cameras were for show, barely functional. But there was one camera in the medication room that actually worked, and it covered part of the hallway. The footage was stored on a local server, kept for 90 days before being automatically deleted. The expert pulled everything from the past 3 months. Hours and hours of footage. Derek and 3 other bikers spent 2 full days watching it on fast forward, looking for anything suspicious. On the 2nd day, they found something. It was from 6 weeks before Margaret's death. Craig was in the hallway with an elderly male patient. The patient was moving slowly with a walker. Craig said something to him. The patient shook his head. Craig grabbed the walker and yanked it away. The patient fell. Craig stood over him, not helping, just watching. After a full minute, Craig picked the patient up roughly and dragged him back to his room. The footage wasn't perfect. You couldn't see everything clearly, but you could see enough. Craig had deliberately made that patient fall, then left him on the ground suffering. Derek had his proof. But now he faced a choice. If he turned this footage over to the police, they'd ask how he got it. The illegal hack would make the evidence inadmissible. Craig would walk free, and Derek might face charges himself. He needed another approach. He needed to force Craig into confessing, or he needed to make the nursing home turn on Craig themselves. Either way, it required pressure. The kind of pressure that lawyers and police couldn't apply. Derek called the Iron Riders together. They had 20 members in total. He explained the situation and asked who wanted in. Every single hand went up. These men had mothers, grandmothers, people they. What happened to Margaret could happen to anyone's family. They came up with a plan. It was risky and would probably cross several lines. But Thomas, sitting in that room with them, gave his blessing. "Do whatever you have to do," he said. "My mother deserves justice. I don't care how we get it." Derek looked around the room. "Then let's make this happen." The Iron Riders started with Craig's life outside work. They learned everything about him. He lived alone in a cheap apartment. He had a gambling problem, spent most of his money at a casino 2 towns over. He had no wife, no girlfriend, no kids. His only regular social contact was with other nursing home staff and the people at the casino. Derek sent 2 riders to the casino. They posed as regular gamblers and struck up conversations with Craig. They played cards at his table, bought him drinks, made him feel comfortable. Over several nights, they became friendly. Craig talked freely when he drank, bragging about how he'd worked at the nursing home for years and gotten away with things that would get others fired. He never explicitly admitted to hurting patients, but he hinted at it. He said old people were difficult, that sometimes you had to be rough to make them cooperate. He laughed about the families who complained and got gober. He felt untouchable. The bikers recorded these conversations. Still not enough for a conviction, but enough to show Craig's character, his arrogance, his lack of remorse. Meanwhile, other Iron Riders focused on Meadowbrook itself. They showed up every day, parking their motorcycles in the visitor lot. 6 to 8 bikes at a time, riders in full leather and patches. They didn't break any rules. They signed in at the front desk, said they were visiting family members. They walked the halls slowly, looking into rooms, making their presence known. The staff grew nervous. Having bikers around constantly, watching everything, made everyone uncomfortable, especially Craig. He asked the administrator to ban them. The administrator said he couldn't legally do that if they were legitimately visiting residents. Craig started making mistakes. He got paranoid, jumpy. When Sarah saw him in the hallway, he accused her of talking to people. She denied it, but Craig didn't believe her. He got aggressive at a patient in front of other staff members, something he'd usually been careful to hide. 2 nurses reported him to the administrator. The administrator called Craig into his office. They had a relationship, some kind of friendship that had protected Craig for years. But now the administrator was worried. These bikers, these families asking questions, this attention on the facility, it was bad for business. He told Craig to take a week off, let things cool down. Craig refused. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said. "If I leave now, it looks like I'm guilty." The administrator insisted. Craig stormed out. That night, Derek went to Craig's apartment. He knocked on the door. Craig answered, annoyed. When he saw Derek, a big man in a leather vest, his expression changed to fear. "I just want to talk," Derek said calmly. "I'm calling the police," Craig replied. "Go ahead," Derek said. "Tell them why a biker is at your door. Tell them about Margaret Mitchell. Tell them about the other patients you've hurt." Craig's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Derek pulled out his phone and played one of the casino recordings. Craig's own voice, drunk and boasting, talking about how old people were easy to control if you scared them enough. Craig tried to slam the door. Derek pushed it open. Not violently, just firmly. He stepped inside. "We need to talk about what happens next," Derek said. Craig backed up. "You can't be in here. This is breaking and entering." "You're right," Derek said. "So let's make this quick. I have testimony from staff members about what you did. I have families ready to come forward. I have recordings of you bragging about abusing patients. And I have friends who are very motivated to see you punished." Craig's hands were shaking. "What do you want?" "I want you to confess," Derek said. "I want you to go to the police tomorrow and tell them exactly what you did to Margaret Mitchell, how you beat her, how you left her to die." Craig shook his head. "I'll go to prison." "Yes," Derek said. "You will. But if you don't confess, I'll make sure your life becomes unbearable. These recordings will go to every nursing home in the state. Your name will be everywhere. You'll never work in healthcare again. And my friends will make sure you never have a moment of peace. We know where you work, where you live, where you gamble. We'll be there. Always." It was a threat, clear and direct. Craig knew Derek meant it. "And if I confess?" he asked. "Then you face justice through the legal system," Derek said. You'll have a trial, a lawyer, all your rights. It's more than you gave Margaret. Derek left. He didn't know if Craig would actually go to the police. But he'd planted the seed of fear. Craig didn't go to the police the next day, or the day after. But Derek wasn't surprised. People like Craig didn't break easily. They needed more pressure. The Iron Riders escalated. They started showing up at the casino where Craig gambled, not playing, just watching. Craig would sit at a card table and see 3 bikers standing nearby, arms crossed, staring at him. He couldn't concentrate. He lost money faster than usual. He complained to security, but the bikers weren't doing anything illegal. They were just standing there. At work, Craig found his car surrounded by motorcycles every time he left. The riders didn't approach him. They just sat on their bikes, engines rumbling, watching him walk to his car. Craig would wheel away, and they wouldn't follow. But the message was clear. We know where you are. Staff members started avoiding Craig. Sarah had told 2 other nurses what she knew. Those nurses told others. Soon everyone at Meadowbrook knew that Craig was responsible for Margaret's death, and that a group of bikers was investigating. Nobody wanted to be associated with him. The administrator called Craig in again. You need to resign, he said. This situation is out of control. Craig refused. I'm not admitting guilt by quitting. Then I'm suspending you pending an internal investigation, the administrator said. Craig finally understood that his protection was gone. The administrator wasn't his friend anymore. He was liability. That night, Craig got drunk at the casino. He lost $500 in an hour. When he left, Derek was waiting in the parking lot. Just Derek this time, alone, leaning against Craig's car. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Derek said. Craig was drunk, angry and desperate. What do you want from me? I told you I'm not confessing. Then you're going to prison, the hard way, Derek said. I've got a lawyer looking at the evidence we've gathered. He says we have enough to bring wrongful death suits against you in the nursing home. You'll be drowning in legal fees. Your name will be in every newspaper. Everyone will know what you are. Craig's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She just wouldn't stop yelling. I just wanted her to be quiet. Derek went very still. What did you say? Craig realized what he'd just admitted. He tried to backtrack. I didn't mean I wasn't. Derek pulled out his phone. He'd been recording the entire conversation. You just confessed to killing Margaret Mitchell because she was yelling. Craig panicked. He lunged at Derek, trying to grab the phone. Derek, bigger and stronger, pushed him back easily. Craig fell to the ground. Derek stood over him, phone in hand. You have 2 choices, Derek said. You go to the police tomorrow with your lawyer and confess properly. Or I send this recording to every news station in the state. And you face whatever comes next. Your choice. Craig was crying now, sitting on the pavement of the casino parking lot. I never meant to kill her. I just lost my temper. Tell that to her son, Derek said. Tell it to the judge. But most importantly, tell it to the police. Tomorrow, or I'm done being nice. Derek walked away. Behind him, Craig sat in the parking lot, broken. The next morning, Derek called Thomas. It's over, he said. Craig's going to confess. Thomas didn't believe it at first. How do you know? Because I talked to him, Derek said, and he knows he's out of options. At 2 in the afternoon, Craig Hendricks walked into the police station with a lawyer. He asked to speak to the detective who'd handled Margaret Mitchell's case. The detective, surprised, brought Craig into an interview room. Craig confessed to everything. He said he'd gotten angry at Margaret for being difficult. He'd grabbed her, shaken her, pushed her down. When she hit her head on the floor, he'd panicked. Instead of calling for help, he'd put her back in bed and falsified the records. He knew she was seriously injured, but did nothing. She died hours later. The detective recorded everything. When Craig finished, he was arrested on the spot. Charges: involuntary manslaughter, elder abuse, falsifying medical records, and obstruction of justice. Craig Hendricks tried to recant his confession. His lawyer argued that it had been coerced, that Derek Paulson and the Iron Riders had threatened and harassed him into admitting guilt. The prosecutor brought Derek in for questioning. Derek told the truth. Yes, he'd approached Craig. Yes, he'd pressured him. But he'd never physically harmed him, never explicitly threatened violence. He'd simply told Craig that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that confessing was his only option. The judge ruled the confession admissible. Craig had come to the police voluntarily with a lawyer. He'd been read his rights. He'd admitted his guilt in clear terms. The pressure from the bikers, while questionable, didn't rise to the level of coercion that would invalidate the confession. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecutor called Sarah and 2 other nurses who testified about Craig's history of violence toward patients. They brought in the families of other patients who died under suspicious circumstances. They showed the security footage of Craig deliberately making a patient fall. Craig's lawyer tried to paint him as a burned-out healthcare worker who'd made a tragic mistake. He argued that Margaret's death was an accident, that Craig had simply been trying to control an agitated patient, and things had gone wrong. The prosecutor destroyed that argument. Craig Hendricks didn't call for help when Margaret Mitchell hit her head. He didn't notify a doctor. He falsified records to cover up what he'd done. That's not an accident. That's negligence at best, murder at worst. Thomas attended every day of the trial. Derek and several Iron Riders sat in the back of the courtroom, a silent reminder of how this case had come to light. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Craig guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. You were in a position of trust. Families put their loved ones in your care, believing you would protect them. Instead, you abused them. You killed Margaret Mitchell and tried to hide it. This court sentences you to 15 years in prison. Craig showed no emotion as he was led away. Thomas broke down crying. Derek put a hand on his shoulder. Your mother got justice, he said. That's what matters. But the story wasn't over. The trial had exposed Meadowbrook Care Facility's systemic failures. How had Craig been allowed to work there for 6 years, with multiple complaints against him? Why hadn't management investigated? Why had they covered for him? 3 families filed wrongful death lawsuits against Meadowbrook. The Iron Riders helped them find lawyers willing to work on contingency. The nursing home fought hard, but the evidence from Craig's trial was damning. Their own staff testified that management knew about Craig's behavior and did nothing. One by one, the families won their cases. Meadowbrook was ordered to pay millions in damages. The facility's administrator was fired. The state health department launched an investigation into practices at the nursing home. Within a year, Meadowbrook's license was suspended. The facility closed permanently. Word spread about what the Iron Riders had done. Local news covered the story of how a motorcycle club had brought justice where the legal system had failed. Other families dealing with similar situations started reaching out to Derek, an elderly veteran who'd been neglected in a different nursing home, a woman with dementia who'd been financially exploited by her caretaker, a disabled man who'd been physically abused in a group home. Each case was different, but the pattern was the same. Vulnerable people being hurt, systems failing to protect them, families with nowhere to turn. Derek didn't set out to become an advocate. He was just a biker who'd wanted to help one grieving son, but now he had a reputation. People trusted him because he got results. The Iron Riders started taking on more cases. They developed a system. First, they'd meet with the family and hear their story. Then they'd investigate, using the same techniques they'd used for Thomas. Quiet observation, conversations in bars, surveillance, digging into records. When they found evidence, they'd turn it over to authorities. If authorities didn't act, they'd apply pressure, legal pressure when possible, social pressure when necessary. They worked with lawyers, journalists, and activists. They learned about elder abuse laws, patient rights, and how to navigate the healthcare system. What started as a one-time favor became an ongoing mission. Thomas became involved too. After his mother's death, he couldn't return to his normal life. He quit his job and started volunteering with the Iron Riders. His experience with the legal system, his understanding of what families went through, made him valuable. He became the one who talked to families, who explained their options, who held their hands through the process. Derek and Thomas formed an unlikely partnership. Derek, the tough biker with a criminal past, and Thomas, the quiet, educated son who'd never broken a rule in his life. Together, they helped dozens of families over the next 2 years. They didn't win every case. Sometimes the evidence was too thin. Sometimes the abusers were too well protected. Sometimes families gave up because the fight was too exhausting. But they won enough cases to make a difference. Nursing homes in the region became more careful. Staff members thought twice before mistreating patients. Everyone knew that if they hurt someone, the Iron Riders might come asking questions. Sarah, the nurse who'd first told Derek about Craig, left Meadowbrook before it closed. She got a job at a better facility and became an advocate for patient safety. She worked with the state health department to develop new protocols for reporting abuse. She often credited the Iron Riders with giving her the courage to speak up. The families who'd won settlements used their money in different ways. One family started a foundation for elder abuse awareness. Another funded legal clinics to help families navigate nursing home complaints. Thomas used part of his settlement to create a scholarship for nursing students, hoping to train a new generation of caregivers who would actually care. 3 years after Margaret Mitchell's death, Derek got a call from Thomas. "You need to see this," Thomas said. They met at a coffee shop. Thomas showed Derek a newspaper article. Craig Hendricks had been attacked in prison. Another inmate, an older man serving time for robbery, had beaten Craig badly. The inmate's mother had died in a nursing home under suspicious circumstances. When he heard Craig was in prison for killing an elderly patient, he'd taken revenge. Craig survived but was hospitalized for 2 weeks. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd beaten elderly patients was now the victim of violence himself. Derek didn't take pleasure in it. "That's not justice," he told Thomas. "That's just revenge." "Isn't that what we did?" Thomas asked. "We pressured Craig until he confessed. We made his life hell. We operated outside the law." Derek shook his head. "We investigated. We found evidence. We gave Craig the chance to make it right. What that inmate did was just violence. Craig's in prison because he committed a crime, not because someone beat him up." Thomas thought about it. "So, what's the difference between justice and revenge?" "Justice is about making things right," Derek said. "Revenge is just about making someone suffer. We didn't want Craig to suffer for the sake of suffering. We wanted him to answer for what he did." There's a difference. It was a philosophical conversation neither of them expected to have, but working these cases had changed both men. Derek had started thinking more about right and wrong, about when it was okay to bend rules and when it wasn't. Thomas had become more cynical about institutions but more hopeful about individuals. They continued their work with the Iron Riders. The group grew. New members joined specifically because they wanted to help with investigations. They took on cases involving not just elder abuse but child neglect, domestic violence, corruption, anywhere vulnerable people needed someone to stand up for them. The legal community had mixed feelings about the Iron Riders. Some lawyers appreciated the thorough investigations they conducted. Others worried about vigilantism and evidence obtained through questionable means. Police departments were similarly divided. Some cops worked with the bikers, others saw them as troublemakers interfering with official investigations. Derek didn't care about the opinions, he cared about results. Every case closed, every abuser held accountable, every family who got answers. That's what mattered. On the 4th anniversary of Margaret Mitchell's death, Thomas held a small memorial service. Derek and the Iron Riders attended, so did Sarah and several other nurses who'd spoken out against Craig. So did families from Moatha cases the bikers had worked. Thomas gave a short speech. "My mother was just one person, one elderly woman in one nursing home. Her death could have been ignored, forgotten, written off as an unfortunate accident. But because people cared enough to fight, she got justice. And that justice has rippled out. Other families got justice. Bad facilities got shut down. Laws got strengthened. None of that would have happened if we'd just accepted that nothing could be done." He looked at Derek. "My mother's last gift to me was teaching me that justice doesn't always come from courts and police. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people who refuse to let wrong go unpunished. Sometimes it comes from bikers who show up at a funeral and say, 'We'd like to help.'" After the service, Derek and Thomas stood by Margaret's grave. "Do you think she'd approve of what we did?" Thomas asked. Derek smiled. "I think she'd be proud, not because we broke rules or pressured people, but because we didn't give up, because we kept fighting until the truth came out." They walked back to the parking lot where the motorcycles were lined up. 20 bikes now, twice as many as that first day at the funeral. Each rider had their own reason for being there. Each had their own story of injustice that had brought them to this work. Derek started his bike. The engine roared to life. One by one, the other riders followed. They rode out of the cemetery in formation, a thundering procession that turned heads and made people stop to watch. To some people, they looked like troublemakers. To others, they looked like heroes. But to the families they'd helped, they were simply the ones who showed up when everyone else had walked away. The Iron Riders continued their work for years. New cases, new injustices, new families desperate for help. Derek got older, his beard turned completely white, but he never stopped riding. Thomas stayed involved, becoming the public face of their advocacy work. Together they proved that justice doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a badge. Sometimes it wears leather and rides a motorcycle. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. Margaret Mitchell's story became a reminder that one person's death could spark a movement, that ordinary people could make extraordinary changes, that giving up was never the only option. Her son had refused to let her death be meaningless, and in doing so he'd saved countless others from the same fate. That's the power of refusing to accept injustice. That's what happens when someone steps forward and says, "I'll fight for you." That's how one elderly woman's tragedy became a force for good. Justice came for Margaret Mitchell, and because of her, justice came for many others too.